What I knew how to do is drive volume into the practice, do new patient marketing and reactivate patients. So that was kind of the strategy from the beginning, was buy these underperforming practices and then turn them around and get them to grow.
Hey there, dental economist. If you're a dentist owner or a leader within a dental business thinking about growing production, case acceptance, patient and staff satisfaction, positive outcomes, and everything else that comes with running a dental business, then you're a dental economist, and you've come to the right place. Welcome to the Dental Economist Show. We're meeting at the intersection of profit and purpose as I sit down with dental leaders who share their stories about dentistry, business, and growth. Welcome back to the Dental Economist Show with me, Mike Huffaker. Today, we're excited to welcome Vince Dilley, the founder and CEO of Platinum Dental Services. Vince founded Platinum in 2012, and they have grown to 41 offices, creating hundreds of jobs and donating over $1 million in free dentistry along the way. Vince, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. How are you doing today?
Doing well, Mike. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this. We've had the opportunity to break bread together a few times over the past year and really enjoyed the conversations I've had with you. And I think what you've done at Platinum, just really, really interesting. Could you share a little bit about how you got started in the first place?
Gosh, I originally bought a company that was supporting dental offices through patient reactivation efforts. And then after a couple of years of running that, decided that I'd try my hand at partnering with the dental office and seeing if I couldn't help with the other aspects of the dental office. And not really knowing what I was getting into, I did know how to reactivate patients and get those overdue hygiene patients coming back through the door. And then that happened in 2012. And then we bootstrapped to 38 offices over the next 10 years or so. And just recently did our first private equity transaction. So it's kind of how I got into the industry.
So bootstrapping to 38 offices over the next 10 years or so skips over a whole bunch of things that I would imagine took place. When you first set out, what was the strategy for how you were going to acquire offices? What were you looking for? How did you kind of get the business off the ground initially?
I had no money. So for me, financing was key and figuring that out. And so what I knew how to do was drive volume into the practice, right? Do new patient marketing and reactivate patients and kind of get the volume of patients coming back through the practice. So that was kind of the strategy from the beginning was, let's identify some offices that we could buy, on a seller finance note or some type of creative financing just so that we could actually acquire the practice. And then we got really good at just, reactivating those patients. So that was one of the key things I looked at when analyzing practices was, how many patients can I reactivate, right? Because that was kind of the untapped potential within a practice. And so that was really the focus was, buy these underperforming and struggling practices and then turn them around and get them to grow. So we were kind of a value add proposition, not necessarily because we foresaw the year 2024, 2025, where it's, today we happen to be in the right place at the right time of the market. But back then it was really just about, man, what can we afford to buy? And that was nothing all that pretty. So we had to buy some stuff that we ran into burning buildings and turned them around. And anyway, we've been doing that for 12 years. So it's really become kind of who we are and what our value proposition is to those doctors.
Was there a point in kind of that growth arc where you got stuck or things got more difficult? Like I've heard people talk about, you go from 1 to 2, like, okay, 2 to 4, all right. But then like when you start to need to create more of a corporate structure to support the organization, it becomes a little bit trickier, or you need to slow down, or sometimes like it becomes scarier because you're reinvesting and maybe you go through a time where you're actually making less before you kind of get out on the other side. What were the most kind of difficult phases of growth, would you say, and why?
Yeah, so it's really good insight. There's definitely inflection points along the way. And I think that depends on the structure and kind of what your business strategy is, right? If you're trying to centralize everything up front, it's going to be really capital intensive to be able to grow, right? So the more you can kind of keep centralized or, keep decentralized, but then as you grow, you really get economies of scale in some really key areas that if you can centralize those services, it's really going to help not just, save costs, but it's going to help you drive better performance at the practice level. So, that's different for every DSO and what their business strategy is. But for sure, for me, it was the first 5 to 7 years. I felt like I was holding on by my fingernails, right? I was paying all my doctors more than I was paying myself. I was reinvesting everything I had back into the business. We've always been really efficient from a support service cost structure standpoint. And so for us, we really iteratively added additional support services along the way. But 3 to 5 was really tough. It was tough again at 10. Felt like we were at like 18 to 20 forever, 18, 20, 22. And, I think you hit another inflection point about where we're at right now, about 40. So those were kind of those key areas. We had a few advantages in that for a lot of groups, their approach is, let's go buy a bunch of dental offices and then we'll figure out what to centralize, right? And then once you go to centralize, it's, it's cost additive there. Whereas for us, it was a little bit of a profit center for us, right? We had external clients that we were servicing. They were paying us to do their proactive recall efforts. And so, we were making money. We had a profit margin at the centralized services level day one. But then, we got to points where we had to go into negative cash flow at the home office to be able to centralize the right support services to continue to grow. So each one of those points were really key. But again, I think those points probably are different, business by business, depending on what your strategy is.
When you talk about buying some practices that aren't so pretty, and having to run into the burning building and kind of rescue it, when it's not pretty like that, what are the reasons? And because, you and I were having some conversations at dinner, and it's like a lot of these doctors that turned out to be fantastic and really offer great patient care and do really good things within the practice. My initial notion would be, oh, well, maybe it's not a good provider, but that's not really the case. Like, it's more about systems. Can you kind of talk a little bit about what really makes the difference to turn these practices around?
Yeah, it's definitely not always the doctor or always the management. I mean, to some degree, it's always some level of management. But no, I mean, some of our best partnerships were doctors who really just underproduced most of their career and didn't know how to break through an inflection point. Right? They were fine at getting their practice to maybe $600,000, $700,000 a year, but being faced with the decision to work an extra day or to work evening hours or to bring in an associate, right? Those were things that really stop them from being able to grow to that next level. And so our ideal partnerships are those guys. There are those cases where you get in and, there's either communication limitations based on the doctor's skill set or, even personality conflicts and philosophy, conflicts, things like that. So about 2/3 of the doctors that we've bought their offices from stick around and become partners. And then about another 2/3 either retire or kind of move on and do their next thing. And so, for us, when we first started out, it was like, basically I'd buy anything that I could buy with no money, right? So it's like, if I could buy it with no money, I bought it, right?
If it's free, I'll take it.
Yeah, exactly. So, you do that, when it's a necessity. And now, there's a lot of practices that we bought in the past that we'd never buy today, right? There's just not that we can't turn them around. It's just not, it's a lot of squeeze for little juice. And so for us now, we've moved upstream and we have much more defined, practice profile that we're looking for, where we know there is a lot of unlocked potential within the practice based on that practice profile. But that's more sophisticated than we were in the early years where we were just buying stuff. Anything I could buy with no money, we'd buy. So that's kind of how we've gone about it in the past. But there's a lot of reasons that they don't perform, but the trend ultimately kind of boils back to leadership, one fashion or another. So we're big proponents of talking leadership, training doctors on leadership, training office leaders on leadership. And I believe, I consider myself a student of leadership and will forever be. I think it's kind of a lifelong pursuit. And, for us, it's been a lot of, changing of mindsets to be able to get doctors to where they really want to be.
When you're thinking through the growth from when you founded to 42, what are some of the key times when you need to add new hires into kind of the corporate structure? And what are some of the most important ones to get right at the earlier stages?
That's a super good question because, I see a lot of kind of two different scenarios in the industry, right? Where some groups want to go out and just centralize everything up front. Not to say one's right or one's wrong, but you have to understand, if you're bootstrapping and you're not knowingly going to go way negative into the corporate overhead level or way negative into the EBITDA, the corporate overhead level, you got to stay profitable, right? Thankfully for us, what that's led to is this, our definition of a high quality DSO is one that can drive great year-over-year growth performance in practices while also being incredibly efficient at the corporate overhead level. And so I think for us, we have an 8% management fee at all practices. And we operate at about 6.5 to 7% corporate overhead for the entire organization. And then our practices grow year over year, double digit every year. Last year, we were 11%. Year before that, we were 13% same store growth. So to us, that's the true definition of a high quality DSO, is one that can drive great same store growth results at an affordable cost to the partnership. And if you can do that, you're incredibly valuable to your partners. And so as you think about, which services you're going to add and centralize, for us, it always came back to a hybrid situation. We learned by servicing other practices and doing their recall externally outside of our organization. We realized early on that if there was a way to blame the centralized services, the practice is going to find it, right? Which is a tough culture to have when you're trying to maintain clients and that kind of thing. So transparency both ways, I think, is really important. And I think it's very important for our culture that the responsibility for performance is really on the practice. And we are a supportive function to them. if you're creating a support structure where it's somebody else's responsibility to drive in new patients or to drive profitability in a practice or to perform at a certain level, it creates a tough culture, right? And so we really want the responsibility to be at the practice level. So for most of our centralized support services, they're hybrid, right? Where revenue cycle management, for example, we have centralized revenue cycle management, but we don't handle the entire portion. We specifically removed the portions that we felt like we got good economies of scale. There was great value add, but there's still responsibility at the practice level to get out clean claims, to make sure that they're building things correctly, coding things correctly. We're not going to do that here. We're going to have them do that there and hold them responsible for doing that. And so I think that's how we've been able to iteratively grow the support functions in a highly profitable way.
So how are you structured right now? Do you have RMs? Do you have corporate development? Do you have chief clinical officer? What does it look like within your organization as you move forward?
So like I said, we took our first private equity investment.
Congratulations on that, by the way.
Thank you. Yeah. We're going to add 15 to 20 locations this year. So we're from 41 to 60 or so this year. And we plan to do that every year for the next 3 to 5 years, do at least 15, 20 deals each year. So it's evolving very quickly. If you were to ask me what was the most challenging thing to get right at the centralized level, hands down, it was regional management. How do you bring up leadership who, particularly in our business model where the nuance matters, right? Like when you get into turning around a failing practice, you got to know, which parts are broken and which parts are running well, and you got to focus on the highest priorities. And so for us, that was the biggest challenge, is like, how do we develop leadership that can both be in the nuance and understand at the practice level what they're dealing with, as well as be kind of that higher level leader where they can maintain performance management, have regular cadence of accountability and so forth. It's usually a different skill set. And we went through a lot of iterations of regional management to get that right. And I'm super thrilled with where we are today. Man, that took us years to get right. And so now as we scale out, we're faced with the decision, well, do you grow these regions so big under one regional manager? And I think in some business models, that can work and work well. In our business model, because we continue to buy these underperforming practices, you got to have a lot of presence in these offices. And so we've now kind of duplicated the regional role with what we're calling an assistant regional manager or leader. And we're making sure that nobody's got more than 8 offices that they're dealing with, and the assistants are only dealing with 3 or 4. So by doing that, I think we'll be able to continue to maintain that kind of post-transaction operational performance, but it's definitely an evolution. So outside of that, we have a director of practice operations who oversees those regionals. We have a director of DSO operations that oversees all the DSO functions at the home office or the DSO. And then we have my partner, Patrick Nelson, who has served as the CFO. He's moving to a president role right now. We're bringing in another CFO to be able to handle the CFO functions, and he will stay with more kind of strategic role there. And then we have clinical leadership, so regional hygiene directors, right? So regional hygiene directors, these are hygienists who are chairside 3 days a week and coaching 2 days a week. Then we have regional clinical directors, and those are the clinicians leading clinicians. And then overseeing all the clinicians, we have a clinical board, which is made up of a handful of specialists, a hygienist, and a number of general dentists.
Got it. Thanks for sharing that. Going back to the RM piece, when you talked about the regional managers being maybe one of the more difficult things to figure out, took a number of years to kind of figure out how you were going to work with that. What were the challenges? Was it figuring out what the right recipe was or what the right components of a great regional manager were? Or was it figuring out what the responsibilities would be and how they were to interact with the offices? Like what elements made that challenging?
A little bit of both. I'd say definitely both. We found we were far more effective with people who had grown up in the organization. We brought people from outside the organization, with DSO regional management backgrounds. I've found that that's a little bit more challenging because DSOs are so different, right? And so their idea of what a DSO is or what a regional manager does is just so different than, the next DSO. So I think that's part of the challenge, is like, how do you blend that operational experience, that leadership ability with the nuance of the uniqueness of your DSO? I think that's one of the biggest challenges of DSOs, is how do you customize things to get the culture and the operational performance right for your business structure? Because you can look at my business and it's going to be totally different than a different DSO that is not buying struggling dental practices, right? So I think that blend of operational performance and culture is just really, really key to get right. And it took us a few iterations to figure that out.
Now, the recall business that you had initially prior to founding Platinum, is that something that you work with other groups as well? Or is this only part of the Platinum program at this point?
Yeah. So when it started, it was only external because I didn't have any dental offices, right? When I partnered with my first dental office, I didn't even know what a DSO was. I think I had 2 or 3 dental offices before I knew what a DSO was. So that was definitely not part of the strategy to begin with, but it became much more so. Really, we ran that business externally up through COVID. As you can imagine, through COVID, everybody discontinued support service or external services. So we disbanded all of our clients at that point in time, and then we came back from COVID and everybody wanted recall services, right? So it was like this big pendulum. We were kind of faced with this decision that said, man, like, do we still service these other clients or do we just focus on our business? Coming out of COVID, we decided just to unwind that business, assume all those assets and those agents into our own business. And that proved to be a real, important pivot that we made at that point in time for the growth of the DSO.
Yeah, makes sense. Now, you standardized technology pretty early on. I know you guys are on, well, do you mind if I share who you guys are on? So you're on Open Dental, do your own data warehousing. You shared some of that in the reports that you've built out. A lot of people wait quite some time before they standardize on a solution. Many don't standardize still. When did you decide to standardize, and kind of what was the impetus for making that decision?
Practice number 2, I decided to just let's just switch them over. Again, back to our business model, it's just how do you get operational performance and standardization of things when you're all speaking different languages and living in different ecosystems? And if you're buying these premier kind of high performing practices, there's much more downside risk to switching all that, right? So I get why a lot of DSOs are like, man, we're not going to go in and disrupt the apple cart here. So I totally understand that approach. But for us to get like not just double digit same store growth, if you go back and look at all of our practices, on average, our practices grow 48% year one, 25% year two, and then double digit growth thereafter until I don't know when we're continuing to perform there. So when you look at those types of results, like you can only do that if you're all speaking the same language and you're rolling in the same direction. So for us, that was a really, really big decision. Again, I don't know that we knew it at the time, but it's proven to make this business model successful for us. So really early on.
Yeah, data consistency, I think, plays a huge part in being able to drive towards those outcomes that you're looking for. Can you share a little bit about what you've all done from a reporting and analytics platform? Do you use any third parties for that? Have you done it internally? What's been your approach on being able to make those data-driven decisions?
We use a BI tool. It's called Domo. It's like Power BI or Tableau or any one of those. So yeah, for us, I mean, it was absolutely critical. I mean, we went through this evolution for sure, because we went from like having access to literally no data to having access to anything that we wanted. And, we kind of definitely went through this period of what I call death by data, because like we had everybody looking at everything. And, really when you want performance management, you really need people focused on really the key things that are going to drive that. So we learned that, probably the hard way, as we have most things. But yeah, so for us, we have practice level dashboards where, they're really focused on a few key things that move the needle. And then we have regional dashboards, and then we have clinical dashboards that kind of measure clinical quality, making sure that what's happening in the hygiene department, what's happening in the clinical department, that our clinicians, our clinical board can easily see, hey, these are, we're living up to our core value of clinical excellence. And, if there's anything that seems to be like a red flag that maybe indicates that somebody isn't living up to that, then it gives the clinical board kind of an opportunity to reach out to that individual and just, kind of touch base and collaborate and find out what's happening. So everything from clinical metrics to regional management metrics, and then corporate level kind of financial metrics and things like that. We pull in our call center data, not just our practice management software, but we pull in our call center data. We pull in our financial software. We're actively trying to work and pull in some of our AI data with our artificial intelligence partner on the diagnostic side. So it's just continuing to grow and evolve with all the new data sources that become available.
Yeah, I love the death by data statement. I think that you can easily over-engineer analytics and have so much information that people look at it and don't really know what to do with it. And so to that extent, when you think about kind of what some of your North Star metrics are, where you're like, look, if I had to pare this down and operate the business off these 5 or 10 things, whatever it would be, what are some of those things that for you are most important?
Yeah, so we talk about lead measures versus lag measures. Our industry typically operates on lag measures, maybe not so much anymore, but historically has. So we really try to focus on lead measures, right? The predictive analytics that tell us, hey, what's coming down the pike and what can we influence before it happens. So when you think about that, certainly scheduled production by provider for the next 7 days is a key metric that our front office looks at, right? Is how well are the schedules? The schedules can look full, right? But full doesn't necessarily mean productive. And so spinning out that kind of, hey, here's where my doctor should be scheduled or my hygienist should be scheduled from a productivity level in the next 7 days is a key metric that we look at to be sure that we are continuing to build and be strategic about high performing schedules. So that's certainly a key metric. One metric that for sure every office seems to struggle with when we first partner with them is just collecting from patients, right? Like what percentage of dollars should you be collecting from patients? And so part of this evolution of building all this stuff was kind of determining our own vernacular, right? Like, what do we call that, right? It's just like dollars owed by patients. So we came up with an acronym that's OTC, over the counter collections. And that is the portion that patients should be paying at the time of service. And it was remarkable. When we first partnered with offices, they're collecting like 60% of the dollars they should be collecting from patients at the time of service. And so we're able to shore that up really quick, up to 90%. Just by being aware that, hey, patients are walking out the door without paying their portion. How do we get in control of that? Again, something that you may not run into when you're already buying a high performing practice, but when you're buying challenging, operations, there's holes in the bucket everywhere. And then, on the clinical side, on average, when we first partner with a practice, only 2% of their adult patient base have been diagnosed with a 4341 or a 4342 code, which is the periodontal disease code. So when 2% of the adult patient base has been diagnosed with periodontal disease, there's clear workflow problems in getting full mouth perio charting for patients once a year, which is really the standard of care. And so we're able to present that data to the clinicians, and they're able to take that data and change their workflow and enhance and improve the quality of care that they're delivering. So those are a few that I think are really crucial, both on the administrative side and on the clinical side. And then once you get into centralized operations, revenue cycle is a huge one, right? Are you getting paid on your claims within the time frame that you should be getting paid on those claims? And if not, where is that breaking down? And how can you tighten that up to be sure that your dollars are coming through the door as quick as they can be?
Yeah, I like the lead versus lag, I think is important. When you talk about, I'm probably going to phrase this wrong, but you're saying upcoming 7 days scheduled production, not just whether the schedule's full, but the total production amount per provider over a 7-day period or per practice, I'm guessing. When you look at that, let's say it's not where you want it to be. Now, what do you do with that information?
We definitely look at by practice. We actually look at by region. We look at it by practice. We look at it by provider, right? So we've got that drill capability to be able to see every cut of that data. Our scheduling managers, who are our front desk team members, they understand that that's the number that they're responsible for. So each day in a morning huddle, that is a number that's typically reviewed by the doctor, by the scheduling managers, and by the team as a whole to identify where are we, right? Are we on pace to be as productive as we want to be? Or are we not? And then they make adjustments accordingly, day to day, week to week. If they're continuing to have issues, with that, if that's a kind of a repeat issue, then we look into the why, right? Like, why are we having a hard time building these schedules? And that could be a breakdown in case presentation by the doctors, right? It's not clear enough to the patient what needs to happen. Could be a breakdown in the financial arrangements, financial presentation, right? We're not figuring out the right solutions for patients so that we can make it affordable in monthly payments, whether we're using care credit or otherwise. So those are two really common breakdowns. And honestly, the one that's most common and frankly the easiest to address is lack of focus right at the front desk. There's so many things going on, and you can find yourself on the phone with an insurance company for half the day. Meanwhile, we didn't schedule any appointments, and it's like, wrong priority here, right? Like, yes, it's important, but prioritizing those things, I think, is really a common issue at the front desk. And what's challenging for dentists typically is they don't know what's happening at the front desk, right? Like they do, like they're just like, why aren't we filling? And so the default answer typically for doctors is, I need more patients. And that is just the trickiest thing, because you get into it and you're just like, you're looking at the volume, and we've got all these different practices that we can compare them to. And it's like, I got a doctor reach out to me recently. He says, I just think I need more new patients. And I looked at our Domo, dug into it, and I saw, hey, doc, you've seen more comprehensive exams in the last 30 days than any other doctor in the entire company. You're actually seeing too many patients right now, right? He was spending all of his time in hygiene doing exams, and in his mind, I'm not producing enough. Therefore, I just need more patients. And we said, actually, you need to see fewer patients. We need to bring in another doctor to help with this workload in hygiene. And you're going to be more productive seeing fewer patients because you can take your time with those patients. We did that, and that's exactly what happened. And not only did he become more productive, the practice skyrocketed. I mean, it helped them jump like 60, 65% of the revenue in just 3 months because they had so many patients that one person wasn't able to see. So understanding what the issues actually are versus what is perceived is just a huge value add to our doctor partners.
Yeah, you had shared with me before some of the success stories of some of the doctor partners that you had. And I could tell that those success stories really meant a lot to you. That was part of like the joy that you get with running this business and building the brand. Can you share maybe a few examples of really great outcomes of practices that you had acquired and kind of what the turnaround story looked like?
Yeah, I do. And it does. It means a lot to me that we're able to have an impact, not just in patients' lives, but in these doctors' lives, right? Like that's really who I'm here to support are my doctor partners. So there's been a number of them that were either on the verge of bankruptcy. I bought a couple of them out of bankruptcy, or just some that just really never performed at the level that they wanted to. I can think of one individual, or he was actually selling his practice. We called on his practice, and he said he was selling it. And I says, "Well, what are you gonna go do?" And he says, "I don't know. I'm getting out of dentistry for a little while. I'll probably be back in 6 months." This is, "Well, are you retiring?" He says, "No, I can't retire." He says, "But I'm just tired of dentistry." So I probed a little bit more, and really what he was tired of was the business side of dentistry and not making enough money. And so I said, "Hey, listen, stick around. Let's see what we can do together. And why don't you just take a long vacation every year?" And so we convinced him to stay, keep some ownership in the practice. We brought in an associate. We brought in our integrated specialty, and that practice went from doing $400,000 a year, and he had done about that much for 15 plus years, to where that practice will do over 3 million. They did just shy of 3 million last year. They'll do over 3 million this year. He has a partner in the practice, a doctor partner in the practice. He has an oral surgeon, an endodontist, periodontist, orthodontist that come into that practice. He has really phenomenal hygienists. Oh, he was his own hygienist for years and years, never had a hygienist. And now he's part of this private equity transaction where he's able to roll his equity into the parent company, and he's standing to have generational wealth at the end of his career. So that example. I mean, this guy, and he's super gracious. He texts me at least monthly and just tells me how good God is and how happy he is and how grateful he is. And those experiences, particularly when they feel that level of gratitude, is just incredibly rewarding for me at this stage of my life. And I just hope to do a lot more of that. And you got to think, like, there's not a lot of DSOs lining up to help these guys. In fact, they can't. They're limited by their lenders. They're limited by their lending covenants and their leverage ratios. They actually can't buy these practices. And then if they did they have the operational capability to do it? I think those are, but this is what we do. And now we're going to do it at faster speed and at scale. So that's one. But with that story, for every story like that, there's another, 5 or 10, on top of it. That's we're really pretty much the exact same story.
Yeah, it's a great story. I would imagine he's not tired of dentistry any longer. Refound the passion.
That's right. All of a sudden, he's reinvigorated, and that's the beautiful thing, right? Is because these guys don't actually hate dentistry; they like dentistry. They just don't like what dentistry has delivered for them over the years. And so, and let me be clear, like that did not come easy for him, right? I mean, we were 3 months just like button heads, and I was like, man, like, we can't do the same thing over and over again to get a different result. And we kind of finally had this really almost like determine the relationship, right? Like, let's figure out what this relationship's going to be, right? And we had that conversation, and he said, the lights turned on for him. He's like, all right, he kind of submitted to the whole process, and almost immediately he just started seeing amazing results. So, for us, that's a lot of fun, and we hope to do a lot more of those.
Can we talk about the diligence process and the transaction that you went through? When did you decide that you were going to seek a partnership with private equity? What were kind of the levers that took place within the business, or what brought you to that decision? I think a lot of people probably struggle with, like, do I want to do this? Do I want to bring somebody in? Should I not? Is it the right timing for me, for the business? What were some of the considerations that you had?
Yeah, so considerations were, number one, our doctor partners had an opportunity to, because their equity was really held at the sub DSO level, at the practice level. And in order for them to fully monetize the value that the company would ultimately be valued at, we needed to do a transaction to get their equity from the practice level to the parent level. So for us, that was a big consideration, because we really got through the point, you go years and years with banks telling you no, right? Because you're buying struggling practices, you're turning them around, right? At any given point, you're not like super bankable, to almost overnight, every bank wanting to do business with you. And that was kind of our experience. And we got through that point. And so really we were to a point where we could have continued to do that. But one, it would have been hard for me to get my doctor partners into that position long term. And then two, with the capital partner, obviously it allows us to accelerate growth and to do better things longer term. So for us, those were a couple of the considerations. First and foremost, our doctor partners. We have a few doctor partners that this transaction means generational wealth for them. So that's something that we really wanted to be able to deliver to them. And we made that decision collectively, right? Myself, my partner Patrick, the doctor partners. There's a lot that happens when you do a deal like that. When you're a sub DSO structure, your doctor partners are taking profit distributions. When you do a transaction like that and you roll equity to the parent level, like those profit distributions go away, right? Or at least a portion of them will go away. And so understanding those are the implications, it's really important that we were transparent with the doctors on, hey, here's what that would look like. Is this what you guys want to do? Here are the two scenarios. So we spent a lot of time with our doctors just communicating and over communicating what this might look like. And collectively they said, yeah, like this is what we want to do. And so that's what led us to the decision to seek out a partner. And then we interviewed investment banks and, the rest was history.
So from the point of making that determination after kind of laying out all the different options with all the doctor partners and having your conversations with your partners, from that point to the point of getting the deal done, how long was that time period?
I mean, we decided probably about 2 years from when we decided, because I always built the business in a way where it's like we didn't have to do that, right? And so you could always roll up to that holdco structure, but once you're in that holdco structure, you can do it, but it's pretty hard to unwind, right? And so I kind of always positioned ourselves so like we could always do it if we wanted, but we didn't have to.
Which is a great position to be in, right? Because then you don't have to feel the pressure of trying to get the deal done, and you can evaluate accordingly and at your own kind of timeline.
Totally. That along with, when you're all up here, like what happens to the guy that's, not pulling their weight or, the wants to get out of the partnership or, all of the other things. Whereas if that happened at a practice level, we can handle that relatively easy. But then once you're kind of all rolled up together, it's like there's a lot more restrictions on your equity and what, when you can cash out or if you can cash out and all those kinds of things. So, and a lot of times I see a lot of DSOs, they roll up into this holdco strategy without any of that figured out, right? And so it's just like, hey, we're all in this boat together. Dr. Joe jumped off the boat and he's swimming in an opposite direction. And we have no control over his equity. We've got to buy him out, right? Like it just creates all sorts of complications. So we're really happy with the way that we went about doing that. And yeah, so from there, I mean, it was really from we signed, I think, engaged with our investment bank in May of last year, got the deal. We thought we'd get the deal done by the end of the year. It's a great process to go through. You realize where all your weaknesses are. We needed to shore up some things. We needed to make sure that we were operating better in a few areas. And so we pushed it out a little bit further. And we ended up getting the deal done August the following year. So, just a little over, not quite a year and a half, but year and about 15 months or so.
And was it important to you? I'm sure it was. What was important about the partner that you were going to work with? What were you looking for out of a private equity group?
Yeah, that was huge. For us, I haven't had a boss in 20 years, something like that. So that was like, first of all, can I work with these guys? Right. So for me, that was a big deal. Like, can I work with these guys? I asked every group that we interviewed, we had a lot of interest. A lot at the time we went to market, a lot of deals weren't getting done. Usually differences in valuation expectations was why a lot of them weren't getting done. But, for me, it really mattered. Two things in particular is one, how did they want to formulate a board, right? Was this just going to be kind of a free ride for a bunch of their buddies? And if it was, I wasn't interested. If they wanted to keep it small, they wanted to be value creators with us, with people who are going to help pull the wagon. That was going to be important to me. Also, giving us the autonomy. I didn't want somebody in our shorts every day either, right? Like we wanted to be able to kind of do our own thing. So that was a big one. And then number two was how did they use leverage? Over the last few years, we saw a lot of groups getting a lot of trouble because they were overpaying for practices, over leveraging, money was cheap. And then combine that with maybe kind of a lackluster operational model to be able to drive same store growth and right size that balance sheet and those covenant ratios. A lot of groups got in trouble. So, for us, we wanted to be able to go in with less leverage and be able to be smart about how we used our leverage. And those were the two biggest factors for me. And obviously like the table stakes, which is, hey, this is good chemistry, it's good cultural fit and valuations there. And those things are table stakes. But I think the things that we really thought deeply about were, hey, how do we want to use leverage? And then who's going to be really in the inner circle with us?
Yeah, those are very, very important considerations. When you were going through the process, did you ever consider a strategic, or was it always kind of from the outset, you thought that private equity was the way to go?
Yeah, we decided early on we were going to go with a sponsor of some kind, a capital partner of not a strategic, not because any of them were bad, but because we actually built a platform, right? Like we have a platform delivering same store results of double digits across 41 practices. And we didn't know that we would get a lot of synergies with that, not as much as maybe some others might. And there's great groups in the industry, right? Like we're friends with a lot of the biz dev people of some of these larger DSOs that I think could make great partners. But for us, like we had invested and built a platform. I mean, you figure just at our revenue levels, at the valuation multiple that we got, if you took our support services costs and synergized those, assuming that some of those would go away if you sold to a strategic, it's a good amount of EBITDA that would have gotten dropped to the bottom line had we done that. But for us, long term, the opportunity was better if we continue to run the company.
Yeah, but this is actually, I had not thought of it in those terms before, but it makes a ton of sense. If you were just assembly of locations that had all different systems that maybe you're providing centralized services for marketing efforts or something else without a lot of like centralized offerings, that it's easy to assimilate something like that into somebody else's platform, because those are good. That's going to actually be a big value add for the new platform, because it's a platform that's assimilating a group that did not have that structure in place. But because you did build that, yeah, it makes a lot of sense to do it that way. So that's something I hadn't really thought of when I was thinking about emerging groups and what paths they should take. But it's, I think, a very important consideration.
I definitely think so. We did our work and have great relationships in the industry. And so we've toured a lot of our friends' DSOs and learned about them much bigger than ourselves, and understanding what they do and how they do it and what the top performing ones were actually doing. And that gave us enough information and understanding as to make that decision, right? Because what is value creation, I think, really depends on what the business model is and what you're trying to accomplish. But we found from just speaking with others, there were groups that centralized a ton and ran at a really high corporate overhead. We found there were others that didn't centralize much of anything, and they ran with very, very low corporate overhead. And we found where we wanted to be was kind of right there in the middle, where it's still really, really efficient, but we can get the same store results that we wanted to get, because we found that there were varying results there in those two business models, where a lot of people that didn't centralize a whole lot, didn't provide a lot of support services, had a really hard time operating same store growth, right? Because it's really up to the local level. There's not anything that's driving that. And then being on all different practice management systems and that kind of thing, found that was a challenging model to get same store growth from. So again, no right or wrong way to do it, but it takes time to figure out what you want to do. And I think a lot of people want to just build a DSO and scale it so fast and things like that. It's like, part of our, of not having any money became a real advantage for us, because we had to go slow. We had to be iterative about the organic growth and really understand how to grow practices. During 2021 and 2022, I thought it was a huge disadvantage. So like, man, these guys are slapping practices together, going to market, getting huge multiples. I'm like, what am I doing? I'm like rubbing two sticks together over here. That's like, and really in the end, like in that market, I was probably not the best positioned. In today's market, we're phenomenally positioned. So I think the lesson there is just, be patient.
And a financial sponsor, they need to feel comfortable that there can be additional value added once the transaction takes place. And you've built this model where you've made it very clear that you can drive that same store growth. And so if you can acquire additional practices and find the right ones out there in the marketplace, you're going to be able to grow those practices significantly. There's other groups out there that, to your point, really have not exhibited the ability to drive that type of growth. So the value that sponsor might add is, well, you know what, we're going to standardize your systems. We're going to do all this. We're going to, do all the things that you had already done. So I think it's just a different approach, but I really respect the way that you guys have done it. Can you talk a little bit about the free dentistry that you all do and what that initiative looks like?
Yeah, so this is where I'm really passionate about, just making sure as we go through this journey together, and at the end of our careers, we look back and that we did the right things along the way, right? That we did those things that really meant something, and more than just getting a paycheck or padding our bank accounts, or even just helping patients that can pay for dentistry. But there's this whole arena of people who can use help, and we have the ability to help them. So starting in my very first practice, I was totally broke. I had no money. I was behind on bills. I was watching the payroll account every 2 weeks, just crossing my fingers we had enough money to pay payroll. I hadn't taken a paycheck in a long time. And I really wanted to do this free dental day. And I went to my team and I just said, I had one office. I said, guys, I want to do this free dental day, but I can't pay you. Like, I can't afford to pay you. And everybody's like, no, like, we want to do this. So they all threw their hat in the ring, and they were just like, yeah, let's do this free dental day. And so we did it that very first year, and it turned out to be really everybody's favorite day of the year. And, we were able to help a handful of patients and stuff. So we've done that, I think 11 of the 13 years. We didn't do it the 2 years, 2020 or 2021. And it's just turned into this phenomenal thing where all of our offices, they still volunteer their time. Our vendors, our amazing vendors, Henry Schein and Glidewell, and just these amazing partners that we have, who have big charitable hearts as well, have contributed to us being able to serve our communities. And so we open up our practices, and patients get to come in and choose between a cleaning, an extraction, or a filling. We've done other things like implants. We've done other things like crowns, but kind of generally they get to pick from one of those three things. And we help as many people as we possibly can. We've set up dental clinics in Haiti, which we don't go to anymore because of the political unrest there, but we have one that we set up in Mexico, and a new, more recent partner of mine has set one up in Guatemala. So we're going to Guatemala this year. So we love that. We believe that, to be able to heal people with your hands is one of the most amazing gifts that anybody can have in this world. And even though I don't hold that gift because I'm not a dentist, I find a lot of great reward and sense of purpose in serving and helping our fellow man as much as we can. So we love that. We continue to do it. One of our recent partners did a spin on it this last year, and they opened it up for vets. And so specifically for veterans to be able to come in, and they marketed it well in advance. And I was just down in Arizona last week with that team, and they shared, some of the team members were in tears just sharing some of the experiences that they had seeing these vets get dental care that they didn't have access to, couldn't afford. And to give thanks to those who have preserved and won our freedoms is just a small token of gratitude.
Yeah, that's great. You mentioned earlier that you're a student of leadership and that it's kind of a lifelong journey. What are some of the resources, like learnings that you've had related to leadership? Any favorite books, podcasts, anything at all, like mentors?
Man, I'd say this industry's full of mentors, man. It's really such a cool industry. I mean, I remember sitting on a bench with Rick Workman from Heartland Dental, founder of Heartland Dental, is like sits there with like a no-name guy wearing a hat and sneakers. And I probably had like 5 offices at the time. Dude spent 45 minutes with me on a bench at an ADSO conference. And like this industry is just ripe with people who are willing and wanting to help each other. So for one, I just think it's an amazing industry for that reason. I highly recommend anybody getting involved with ADSO. If they're not, you're going to get access to a lot of really, really smart people who have done what you want to do and, is helping do really good things for the industry. So I think mentorship, you plug into that network, there's kind of unlimited mentorship there. I'm a big fan of John Maxwell. He's kind of a leadership guru. So I read a lot of John Maxwell. Every doctor that enters the organization, we give them the 5 levels of leadership. It's a book that we turn to and help kind of put a framework around how do you advance from one level to the other and be a good leader. But yeah, I am constantly reading leadership books. So I've got, I don't even know how many, just scores of books that I can send you about that. I do like John Maxwell, the leadership podcast that they have as well. Obviously, like listening to you, learning from other entrepreneurs and what they're doing as well. But yeah, there's a host of things. I think one of the great things that if you really pause and appreciate about entrepreneurship is you don't have to do this. You don't have to. Like you choose to put yourself in this position of challenge and growth and discomfort, and that's your choice. Like you can throw in the towel. You don't have to keep doing this. And if you pause and you appreciate that, and you look at that from like a life perspective, you have this opportunity to kind of live a life of mediocrity or to live a life of adventure and joy. And I think a lot of that is found in that discomfort. A lot of that is found in how do I become a leader, right? Like how do I become a CEO of 100 locations, 500 locations, 1,000 locations, right? Like I don't know how to do that today, but that's what I'm after. And so if you have that lifelong pursuit of personal growth and development, man, it's a lot more fun than just clocking out at 5 o'clock, and it plays out into your parenting and your marriage and all your other things. So I don't know, I try to instill that passion, that joy for personal development into our team because, man, we got one shot. We got 80 years on this life if we're lucky. And, you can be a passenger on the ride or you can kind of take control and redefine your relationship with failure. People are so afraid to fail. And the moment you realize that failure is just a step in the process, man, life gets a lot more fun.
That is the perfect spot to end this conversation. Could not have said any of that better myself and wholeheartedly agree with all of that. Vince, thank you so much for coming on. Really, really enjoyed the conversation. It was great to have you. We'll love to do it again sometime.
Absolutely, Mike. Hey, thanks for letting me be on and thanks for what you're doing for the industry.
Thank you. The Dental Economist Show is brought to you by Planet DDS, home of Dental OS. To find out more about how cloud-based dental software by Planet DDS helps unleash dentists and their staff to focus on patient care, visit www.planetdds.com. Stay tuned for upcoming episodes by following wherever you listen to podcasts. And thank you for listening.